Hello friends, welcome back. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, and I for one am absolutely delighted to be here. If everything goes well, hopefully you guys will feel the same way by the time we wrap this up. Today we're going to take a little tour of the Greek islands in the Aegean Sea, 5 big ones, and we'll see a few dozen more that probably have names, but they're so small that they really aren't worth mentioning. But there is one tiny one I will mention to you while we're going along. And we're going to land on the island of Santorini, which is a place that I have been hoping and praying would get cleaned up in the sim because up until last week, it was a disaster. But I have acquired an add-on that was released just last week that repairs not only the airport out there, but adds a mesh for the whole island, which made a huge improvement, all the difference in the world. So as far as our plane selection goes, I was all set to take the analog King Air up for this because my avionics were finally working properly. Took a few test flights, everything was great, and then last night it stopped working again. So I think I finally had enough of that plane. After almost a year of battling it, I'm not even going to try to fly it again, which is too bad because when it was working, it was awesome. But look what we have instead. I have been wanting to try out the A-10 for a very long time because it had a pretty high user rating, and this is the Deimos version of it, by the way. There's another one you can get in the sim, which does not have a good user rating. But it's definitely off the beaten path, even for the warplane category, but I wasn't going to pay full price for it because I don't fly planes like this very often. And then I noticed it's currently on sale for around 17 bucks in the marketplace, so I figured we'd go ahead and take the plunge. And the field of view is far better than the King Air in this one anyway, so probably a better choice anyhow. So if you're thinking about getting it yourself, I'll give you some of my candid thoughts as we go along. It's been a little bit glitchy for me. The bottom line is, I think probably even at the full retail price, it's pretty fairly priced. Maybe a few bucks cheaper would be right on the money for me. But one of the things that was kind of glitching, which I had to shut our canopy because it kept opening and closing, which I think after flying this a few times has something to do with what it perceives the airspeed to be. Because even when I tried to open it on my, retaxing back to the runway after I landed, it would keep opening and closing if I was going faster and slower. And we have a pretty stiff headwind here of about 10 knots. So the only thing I can imagine is that that has something to do with it because it would just keep opening and shutting on its own. And you can drop the little ladder and everything, which is pretty cool. It's all animated. Inside and outside, you can tell, looks pretty good. And there are not a lot of reviews or tutorials about this plane, which was a little bit frustrating because I couldn't find a manual either. And some of the stuff is not clearly labeled. So I had to figure out how to work it. I'll kind of walk you through that in case you want to get it and you need a little help with it. You might want to bookmark this video because I will go through the full startup procedure for it, which isn't that complicated. As far as what works in here, almost all of the switches and buttons do work. We don't need to use that many of them to take flight. Everything around here you can push. Most of it's inoperable. This side's going to be where our map and navigation stuff is if you want to set it to that. I couldn't figure out how to get the autopilot to work from inside the cockpit though, but my external stuff does work. You'll see a map come up here in just a minute. So we're going to use the external hardware. Couldn't figure out how to get any kind of autopilot functions out of it though. Okay, so if you want to drop your ladder, just as a heads up, you just push the top of this little red button right here. This is the canopy button right here. So you push that thing, it'll flip open and the ladder will drop down on the side, which is pretty cool. And it comes with lots of liveries too. I picked one that I thought looked very Mediterranean since we're out here. I think it was called the Demo Pack. Okay, so first thing we need to do is turn the battery on, which is right over here. And it's too bad we can't open the canopy because the engine sounds are pretty cool. APU start, which is right down there. And while we're here, we'll go ahead and lock our ejection seat or arm it. And we have to wait for the APU to get up to 100 before we can do anything else as far as starting the engines go. So that'll happen pretty quickly. While that's going on, we'll turn on our main fuel pumps and our wing fuel pumps. And there's a little button behind the throttle. I had to set up a switch bank that I had to set up another camera for because you can't see it behind the throttle. This is for, I guess, powering the yaw and pitch controls. So that's good to go. All right, so that's at 100%. Okay, so to start it, you got to push. This is the left starter. This is the right starter. When you push it, it doesn't make any noise when you push it, and it doesn't move at all. So I wasn't even sure it started the engine, but you can look over here. Once we push it, you'll see this starts coming up for our left engine. So we'll push that. You probably saw that it didn't move and didn't make any noise, but you can see the left engine is spooling up. And once that's done, once that gets to 60% over here, then we can start the right engine. And while that's happening, we'll look at our map. So while this one is running up, the add-ons that we've got for this, we've got 4 of them, which I'll link in the video description, as always, along with this exact flight plan if you want to take it as we are. And one of the add-ons is the Payware for Santorini, which I think was around 20 bucks, but I mean, it was a huge difference. So if you like flying around out here, I would definitely check that out. The other 3 are airport fixes, some of which we'll be flying over. This one is touched up. The one we're coming into is part of the Santorini pack. But just a heads up, one of the links for the add-ons that I'll give you, you'll need to drop down 1 folder level because there's like 10 airports in there and the whole file is like a gigabyte. So you'll just want to select this one if you want to add this one, which is Lima Golf November X-Ray. And I'll tell you about this airport in just a second once we start taxing. All right, so that one's almost at 60, so we'll go ahead and turn the other one on, then I'll get the APU off, and then we'll look at the Google map. All right, so that starts the right one. And we're going to be cruising initially at 4,000 feet and then 6,000 feet. I'm going to turn our oxygen on anyway since our guy's wearing his mask and I don't want to disappoint him since he went through the trouble of putting that on. But that's where the oxygen is, and it will keep it lit up over here on your... These are not all lit up right now, I don't think, by the way. Well, maybe they are. but we're right in the sun, so it's hard to tell if they're on or off. All right, this is the one that really got me. The avionics switch is this thing here, which says CICU. Not sure what that stands for, but that's the avionics switch, and it will not highlight when you click on the eyeball. So I had no idea where it was. I had to find that in a tutorial. That's where it is. It's this one right here. And everything else, as you can see, when you move over it, you can click on it. Don't know what most of it does. You click on most of these things, it just says inoperable. In our map over here, you can zoom in and out, but it does not show your flight plan on here. So I know some of the other planes, fighters in particular, that have these at least show the flight plan. This one does not. But it will take the flight plan once we turn on the autopilot. And there's several other little quirks about the throttle and stuff that I'll tell you about once we go. Okay, that's almost at 60, so let's go ahead and check our barrow and turn the parking brake off. And then I'll check a little NavMap over here, and then we'll start moving. Alright, so let me just scroll down a little bit on my notes and zoom out a little bit on a little NavMap. Real quick, let's take a look at this Google map. Alright, so here's Italy, here's Sicily, which we just flew over a couple weeks ago, and here's Greece and all the Greek islands out here. And this whole area collectively, I'm not great with my geography in this region. I think this whole thing is called the Aegean Sea. Where we're going to be flying is right down here in the center of it, and this is called the Sea of Crete, which I believe is part of the Aegean Sea. This is the island of Crete right down here. The place we're leaving from is on the island of Naxos, or maybe Naxos, I'm not sure how exactly to say that. And here's the city of Naxos. Airport's right about here, so we're going to come up this way, get our altitude, 4,000 feet, which will happen real quick. Cut across the island here, look at this coastline over here, which looks pretty good. There's a few spots where there's some cliffs that don't look phenomenal. There's a little landmark up here I want to show you. Then we're going to come across this way to the island of Paros, come down along this side of it, cruise over Antiparos, come over this way. I found a couple different things unrelated to this trip that I want to tell you guys about that I stumbled across while we're cruising over here. It's about 15 miles. Then we'll head south to the island of Los, which is this right here, and there's a neat little landmark right there I'll tell you about. Come over here, check out the city of Chora, the town of Chora, which is really the only town on the whole island. Come down this way, then we'll come over this way to Santorini, which is this right here. Come over this way, I'm going to try to see as much of it as we can. Come down here, cross over the center of it so we can see the population center, which is really kind of along this edge right here. And then we'll start an actual real approach from an approach plate, which just worked out great because the airport's right about here with the VOR station. The approach starts at the VOR, which will kind of come out this way. Then we'll circle around and land that way. So right now we have a headwind from 15 knots, which is almost a direct headwind, a little bit to the northeast. And this is the live weather. It should get up to probably around 15 knots while we're in the air as well, so that won't be too bad. But it will move us around a little bit as we're taking off. Okay, so parking brake's already off, and what I'm going to do is just stomp on the left brake as we turn around here. And we'll eventually get moving. We'll have to pull that throttle back. Kind of came off our parking area there, but that's fine. If I sound a little nasally, my cold is lingering. I feel fine, but my sinuses are a little bit jacked up, which is a lot of fun when I'm trying to sleep. Alright, let's check our barrel one more time while I'm thinking about that. And you can see the heads-up display. I can't really get all of the information centered on it, so I wanted to be able to see our horizon, which is kind of how I have it centered right now. But there's more information down below that little panel, like our G's and things like that, but we won't really be using that too much. So this thing on our left is our airspeed, and this will be our altitude over here. Climb rate indicator here, flaps indicators over here, altitude there, and airspeed over here. One of the very interesting things about this plane, once we get going, I'm going to give it full throttle once we get up in the air. This runway is only about 3,000 feet long. This is the Naxos National, not International Airport, the only airport on the island. But I'm going to just floor it till we get up in the air, and then once we stabilize at 4,000 feet, I'm going to pull it back to 60% right down here on our RPMs. And the difference between 60%, which will get us cruising at about 280 knots, which will be the right speed for the initial sightseeing, and 61% is about 50 knots of airspeed, which seems really strange to me. And then going from 61 all the way up to 100% is only about another 15 knots of airspeed. So I don't know if that's accurate or not for the plane, but it's really a very narrow range you have to work with if you're trying to slow down at all. And this plane's fun to land too. It's kind of a challenge, which I like. Taking off's not too bad, and we're just barely going to get up in the air by the end of this runway, which kind of surprised me for such a big, heavy jet. This thing can get up and get going, but I think it's made for short field takeoff and landings, relatively short fields. Okay, so there's that. One notch of flaps. We'll turn our landing lights on. Did I turn my APU off? Nope, we got to do that. All right, let's do that. I forgot to do that last time too. All right, so these lights are all off now. If we could see the shadow over here, we would see that those are all off. They just look like they're lit up because it's in the sun right now. All right, I think everything else is pretty good to go, so I'm going to run it all the way up and then just let go of the reins, and we'll be cruising. Let me go ahead and set our initial altitude, which is going to be 4,000 feet. And this thing has a tendency to nose way, way down when you come up. I tried trimming it up. It didn't seem to make much of a difference. So I'm just going to have to kind of watch the stick as we're coming up, or else it'll just plunge back into the ground until we get ourselves caught up with our climb rate, which I'm going to set for 2,000 feet initially. All right, here we go. Full throttle, and away we go. All right, so we got an 8-knot headwind right now, not too bad, but it is pushing that tail a little bit, which is making us nose to the right just a tad. Nothing out of control. I don't know what the rotate speed is. I don't know what the approach speed or gear speed or flap speed is because I couldn't find the manual. All right, start giving it some back pressure, and gears up, and flaps up, and autopilot on, nav, and our initial climb rate will be 2,000 feet, and I'm just going to have to hold that nose up a little bit because it's going to do its thing here. And this thing takes some tight turns, which is awesome. All right, keep an eye on this thing right here. I'm going to tell you about that. See that little thing sticking up? I don't know if you caught it or not, but we're going to see that when we come back around. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Look how tight this thing's turning. Let's see if it'll stop at 2,000 feet of climb. Nope. Nope, do not come down on me. All right, give it a little back pressure on that stick. Find your home. Find your home. There we go. All right, so my only other complaint is that stuff they put on the window right there. I mean, that's really big and not well done, and you would think something right in your face like that, you would just kind of clean that up. I'd much prefer a clean windshield, but it doesn't look all that great. So if I was to put something in the suggestion box, it would be just clear that off completely. All right, so before we get to the actual history of this island, we'll touch on the mythic history, which definitely warrants a mention. And now that we're almost at 4,000 feet, no, we're not there yet. So I'm just going to watch that and then start pulling that throttle back a little bit. So we're at 357 knots there, you can see. And as I pull back, let's just go to 85%. Watch what it's going to do. Not much. So the tallest peak over there, right there to our left, is called Mount Zeus. And according to some versions of the ancient lore, Zeus spent his childhood hiding from his father Cronus in a cave on that mountain. It's just on this side of the mountain. We won't be able to see it from here. And there really is a cave down there, though. And it looks like it really was occupied by someone around 6000 BC, which would be the late Neolithic period. Okay, so now we're coming up on 4,000. I'm going to drop this down to, is that 50 or 60%? Maybe it's 50%. Or whatever it is, I'm going to stop there, because that'll get us to about 260 to 280 knots. All right, we'll let it sit right there. And turn our landing lights off. All right, so we're going to grab just a passing glance at one little landmark I want to show you right over here. And this is a temple it's right there, that spot right there. And you can't see much from up here, but I'll show you all this stuff on little NavMap satellite map at the end. That was originally built in 450 BC, and it was either for Demeter. I'm not great on my mythology either, so I may be saying that wrong. But she was the goddess of agriculture, or her daughter Cori, queen of the underworld, which sounds way cooler. But if it was still serving its original purpose by the 4th century AD, it would have been shut down by the sweeping persecution of pagans under a series of Christian emperors. And by the 6th century AD, the temple had been torn down and a basilica was built from the rubble on the same site. See, this scenery out here looks pretty good. Really good. Along this coast will look pretty good too. But when I look down at a modern picture of that temple area, the ruins still look like a temple, so I don't know if they tore the church down eventually and rebuilt a portion of the temple or what the deal is with that. But going back even further than the origins of Greek mythology, they found evidence of Neanderthals. Again, we've seen a couple places where they found Neanderthal evidence going back 200,000 years on this island, which is at least 4 ice ages ago. And I mention that intentionally because it kind of helps us conceptualize just how much time that really is. So there's a pretty good chance that there was a lot less islands out here and a lot more big land masses several times during that span, considering sea levels dropped by an average of 400 feet around the world during each of those freeze-ups. I love this. Look how tight that thing's turning. Awesome. If only that stuff wasn't on the window. That's cool. Let's hop outside real quick. Very cool. These coastlines aren't too bad. We're going to see some that look even better than this until we get to some cliffs right up here where there's going to be a couple little minor issues. But this island used to also host a extinct breed of dwarf elephant with a Latin name that was way too long and complicated to try to pronounce. But they're actually a species of what was once much larger elephants, full-sized elephants, that evolved to be smaller due to the limited food supply on the islands. The ones down here only got to be about 3 feet tall, which is really short for an elephant, and kind of look like modern elephants, the Indian style with the smaller ears, if you put a hairpiece on one. But much smaller, of course. The elephant, not the hairpiece. The hairpiece was perfectly sized. I'll see if I can find a picture of that and put it on our Discord page. But it appears the first evidence of modern humans on this island goes back to what they found in Zeus's cave down there, which would be almost 8,000 years ago. But by 500 BC, this place was fully Greek, and according to a report by the renowned historian Herodotus, was the most prosperous of all the Aegean islands. And after that, it was under constant assault, changing hands between all the Mediterranean factions for the next 2,000 years until its status as part of the Greek state was made official in 1832. That looks really good. Really good. And it's crazy to me, considering how long people have lived out here, how underpopulated these all seem to me these days. Because there was a time when they were much more heavily populated, I think, even than they are now. But that's just crazy. And all of them are going to kind of look like this. Not a lot of habitation on these. Okay, we're going to see a little bay up here with a point sticking out in the middle of it. And today it's a quaint little tourist destination called Apollonius. But 2,500 years ago, it was a port town where they would carve up huge statues out of the marble quarries on the hill above the town, and then slide the statues on ramps down to the ships and transport them to wherever they were going. And if you visit this area sometime in real life, I checked out some pictures of it, you can see hundreds of unfinished statues, some of them huge, still attached to the mountain, which I would think would be pretty cool. See, there's some of the bad coastline right there. And they said that the terracing that we'll see on the other side as we come around here, so here's a little town of Apollonius right here, and the quarry was probably up in this region right here. So they just carved them out, slid them down there, and put them on the boats. All the little chippings that came off when they were hammering out the statues, they would use them to build up the terraces out here, the walls of the terraces, which I thought was really neat. That's really about the only bad cliffs I think we're going to see, if I'm remembering correctly. Most of the others look pretty good, and even now they're kind of snapping back into place. Alright, we're going to swing out here just a little bit to see if we can spot a dam I just found on the Google map, and if we can see it, it's called the Faranomani Dam, and it was built in 2005 as a store for irrigation water out here. Well, that doesn't look too great, does it? That must have been a spot. That looks like a blotchy, lack of satellite coverage spot. I didn't notice any of those on the world map. I don't think we'll see too many more of those. Alright, so here's some of that terracing here. There'll be another little pocket down here. All of it looks really cool and really detailed, unlike that stuff back there. That looks like it might be a little mine, doesn't it? Alright, so that dam should be right over the top of one of these mountains over here. I mean, look at that. Look how detailed that is. Looks fantastic. This terracing here, great. Oh, there it is right there. Alright, there's the reservoir. In the Google map, it was almost totally dry, and little NavMap, it had a little more water in it, so we'll see how this one looks. And I guess this is a big bird sanctuary these days. Alright, so we're at 287 knots right now at whatever that is, 50 or 60. I can't see that well from here. But if we go up 1%, it'll jump to about 330 knots. That dam looks pretty good, actually. That looks really good. Awesome. Alright, up next is the city of Naxos, which in the Bronze Age, which is roughly 3000 to 1000 BC, was the center of the Cycladic culture out here that encompassed all these islands. And all these islands are still called the Cyclades, by the way. And I should note that my mispronunciation is deeply apologetic because we just picked up someone as a member of our channel that has a Greek surname. So my apologies, and welcome, Johnny. Glad to have you with us. Alright, that thing I was showing you down there is a big temple of Apollos that was built right down here. Well, they were building it right down there. And there's only about 15,000 residents in that town, by the way, which is really the population center of the island. So they started building that temple right down there in 530 BC, never finishing it. So there isn't much to see, but if we were flying closer now, you'd be able to spot that big, massive marble gate that we saw out of our right window. But if it was ever finished, the temple was intended to be the most impressive building in all of ancient Greece. But the emperor who was behind the project got overthrown before it was done, so they never finished it. And I have no idea how tall that gate is, because one site said it was 69 meters high, which is way, way too high, nowhere close to that. Another said 6 meters, which looked way too small, because I saw some pictures of people standing next to it. But probably closer to 50 feet. Alright, this is the island of Paros, which is, in ancient times, was known for its fine marble. Apparently even finer than the marble from Naxos. And those of you into fine marble might recognize the Parian marble name, a term which can be sourced back to this island. And to our right down there, or left down there, is the town of Nosa, also a big tourist destination, which traditionally had been a small fishing village, but in the 1770s it was the site of a Russian naval base during the Russo-Turkish War. And see this little ring down here? You can just barely see it right there. I'll show it to you. You can see it better on the satellite map. That's one of two old watchtower forts that were built by the Venetians in the 1300s, and the Venetians built a lot of castles out here. Built a lot of castles. And I couldn't really tell, what they were doing with that, but one of the Google reviewers, who was very thorough, said that there was another tower on the other side of that bay that they used to put a huge iron chain between the two of them. And I guess he said they could pull that thing up to block ships coming in and out, which is pretty cool. Alright, this thing here is a big modern quarry, but right over here, they have another ancient quarry down there, which had 435 user-uploaded pictures on Google. And I read that thing was mined continuously for nearly 5,000 years. Finally shutting it down in the 1800s. And that particular site is where they mined out the marble for Napoleon's tomb, which might be why it gets so many visitors. And the reviewer said there's a big gate around the entrance to the tunnels over there, but they said the fence has a big hole in it, and judging by the pictures, it seems like that barricade is generally disregarded by the visitors. Alright, we're going to see two airports down here. One will be really easy to see. The bigger one, the easier to see one, is the new Paros airport with a runway of around 4,500 feet. And that one can't be selected in the sim for some reason, even though I think they opened it in 2016. This is it right here. And then down there is the old one. That's about half the length, about 2,500 feet, and you can select that one in the sim, but if you throw in the add-on, which I did put in there for this airport, you'd probably be able to select that one. So it touched it up and probably put it in the sim as well. Alright, up next is the island of Antiparos. And see this tiny little island down here? I'm going to show it to you in just a second so you can view. That one right there. It's called Salagos. And it was the site of the earliest settlement in all of the Cyclades Islands, and it's also the location of the first fortifications in all of Greece. And when you look at it now on the satellite map, there appears to be nothing on it at all. But today the main island here appears to be a pretty high-end destination for holidaymakers with some very ritzy-looking homes right along these cliffs right here. Very nice-looking homes. And it sounds like they have several nude beaches out here too. Maybe even more than regular beaches. I scrolled through about 800 reviewer pics to try to verify that, but I'm sorry to report I couldn't see any revealing evidence. But sometimes you can find those, if you're patient. I found a few at a beach out in Italy once. Well, these cliffs don't look real great either, do they? But once we come around to this island, it's going to look really, really good. And they have something on the other side of this mountain right here called the Cave of Antiparos. And they say they've got the oldest stalagmite in all of Europe out there, 45 million years old. And they say that's also the biggest tourist attraction on the island, even more than the marble mine that you can sneak into, although there were not 435 pictures of that place. So that's pretty cool, and you really can't see much of that even on the satellite map. Alright, this little last island here before we turn to the east is called Despotico and is uninhabited today, but was once very inhabited for several thousand years. And if you take your boat out here, you can drop anchor and explore a big archaeological site that they have right down here, which you can see clearly on the satellite maps. And they have a bunch of volcanic caves along the shoreline, and look how good this shoreline looks down here. So since there's no one down here, you could probably take all your clothes off, I'd guess. Heck, they might arrest you if you weren't naked down there. But that looks cool. Look at these little rocks and stuff right down there. Looks really good, very detailed. Even right down here they got little rocks. And we're going to see a really neat looking little beach right here. Check this out. Look at how good that looks. Oh, that stuff on the window. I mean, that looks amazing. They got a couple little cabanas down there, and they said that the tour boats will leave from the main island and drop people off down there for the day. So you can do whatever you want. I don't think that one was nude, though. You're not supposed to be nude down there. Alright, so we've got about 15 miles to cover until our next island, so as we head east, we'll get a nice look at the southern ends of all the islands that we've seen so far. So here's Paros, here's Naxos over here, and there's Mount Zeus up there. But on a totally unrelated note, well, unrelated to anything we've seen on this tour, you guys know I mentioned earlier that the average fall in sea levels was 400 feet during the Ice Ages. Well, as is often the case, when I was researching that, I got a little bit sidetracked and found a cool little site that would let you scroll down from sea level and keep scrolling for a very long time until you got to the deepest part of the ocean. And as you went along, it would show you different things you might see at different depths, which I just found fascinating. And there were a few things that really surprised me, so I figured I'd jot them down to share with you guys because I knew we'd have a few minutes during this part of the flight. I was always under the impression that the sperm whale was the deepest diving mammal, and I don't know why I thought that, but I just assumed that it was. Oh, before I even get to that, though, the deepest diving human, just to kind of set the benchmark, scuba diving human, is 1,089 feet, and that record was set fairly recently in 2014. Well, a sperm whale can get down to roughly 3,000 feet, which didn't really shock me. I figured it was somewhere around there, which is also about the limit sunlight can penetrate if you have perfectly clear water. But that is not even remotely close to the deepest diving mammal, and this is what shocked me. I'll give you a second to take a stab at the deepest recorded elephant seal dive. Go ahead, just think about that for a minute. Sperm whale goes down to 3,000 feet. It's almost 8,000 feet. So of course I had to see how long those guys can hold their breath. And they can do it for nearly 2 hours, which is almost a record for mammals. That title goes to the creature that is also the deepest diving, and that's called the Cuvier's beaked whale, which I'd also never heard of. And I guess they put a tracker or something on one of those guys, and they said they can hold their breath for up to 138 minutes as far as we know, and can dive to a bone-crushing depth of just under 10,000 feet, which is really deep. Really deep. I mean, that's deeper than a lot of the weird-looking sea creatures and stuff that wash up on the shores in Japan and things like that. As far as shipwrecks go, we'll set our benchmark there with the most famous of them all. The Titanic rests at roughly 12,500 feet down, but the deepest shipwreck ever found is the USS Samuel B. Roberts, also known as the Sammy B, which was only discovered in 2022. And that ship sank during World War II off the coast of the Philippines and sits at a depth of 22,621 feet. Pretty deep. As you probably know, the deepest point in the ocean is the Challenger Deep, located to the southwest of Guam in the Pacific. And that baby plunges to 36,000 feet and was first visited by 2 humans in 1960 before we even got to the moon, after a harrowing 4-hour and 47-minute descent, and has only been visited by 20 more people in the last 64 years. Not easy to get down there. Alright, we're about to take a turn to the south here in just a second. And then we'll see the island of Los. And Los is fairly good size, but very sparsely inhabited. They got a population of only about 2,300 down there as of 2021. That's going to come into view here in just a minute. We got to take one more turn. But they got a lot of islands out here, don't they? But the reason why we're going to check it out is there's a very interesting landmark on the northern end of the island. According to legend, this is where Homer is buried. Yes, the same Homer who, if he really existed, wrote the Iliad, the Odyssey, allegedly. I love that this thing takes these tight banking turns. Really cool. Alright, so there's Los right there. And his tomb is going to be at the end of this road, which is really the only road coming out here. So I'll show you where that is. We won't be able to see it because there really isn't much to see even in real life down there, but I'll show you roughly where it is. And when I looked at pictures of it, they kind of have some... people have piled up little stones and stuff, like little memorials, I guess. And then there's something that looks kind of like a tombstone with some Greek stuff written under it, which I read, but I didn't write down what it was. But that's about all that's down there. And when you head back up that road, there's a little amphitheater that they built also. I think it's called the Homer Amphitheater. So we'll check it out as we come around here. Alright, I'm going to pick up the pace just a hair. Now watch what's going to happen. We're at 279 knots now. I'm going to go up 1% to either 51 or 61, whatever that says. Alright, let's see if we can spot this thing. You can actually see the spot where it is, just barely. So I'll show you where that is. Looks like a tiny little dot. And I'll tell you some more about Homer in just a second. Look at this. I mean, there's just nothing out here. I'll show you the only town here in just a second. Shoreline looks good because there's no cliffs. Alright, so there's the road coming down here that goes to it. I think it only comes out here to go to that road. And then it ends right here. And then the tomb spot is probably right about there. If that's not it right there, which it may be. And that's it. Alright, up ahead we're going to circle to the west of the town of Chora, which is the only population center on this island, although they do have a bunch of monasteries out here. Pretty old ones too. And they've only got about 2,000 permanent residents down here in Chora. Probably just as many tourists on any given day. And there it is right there. Not even a big pier or anything, so I don't even know if cruise ships and stuff are coming over there. Obviously not, unless they're taking tenders in there. It looks like they got a mine or something out here there, doesn't they? Yeah, that's definitely a mine. Look at that. They got some industrial stuff out there. Man, I really wish they did not put that stuff on the window. There's monasteries dotted all over the place out here, but that's about it for the population area. Alright, getting back to Homer for a minute. According to one version of the story... Alright, so we're at 308 knots now, which isn't too bad. I'm going to pull it back just a little bit so I can tell you the story of Homer's death. According to one version of the story, and Homer was blind, I should add, if you didn't already know that, he made a visit to the Oracle at Delphi to ask about his parents and where he came from. And the Oracle replied, "Your mother's home is the island of Los," which is this one to our left here, "which will accept you when you die, but you should be careful of the enigma of the young children." So, of course, Homer was overly curious, decided he'd come out here and check it out, grabbed his seeing eye dwarf elephant, takes a boat out here to see what's going on, and once he starts exploring, he came across some children fishing up on the northern coast. Uh-oh. And when he asked what they caught, the children replied, "Whatever we get, we leave it, and whatever we don't get, we take it with us." Completely stumped by the response, Homer suddenly recalled the warning of the Oracle and was terrified. So he runs off into the hills, in his haste leaving his trusty elephant behind. And unfortunately, the road to the shore was steep and muddy, so the poet slipped, bashed his head on a rock, and died instantly. And that was the end of Homer. Another version of the story is that he simply died from a bout of melancholy brought on by not being able to solve the riddle, which seems far more reasonable to me. All right, there's Santorini over there. We're about to head over to it. The thing the kids were talking about, by the way, was head lice. If only he'd known. If only he'd known. All right, so Santorini is our next and final destination. And in case you skipped the first few minutes of this flight, I did purchase a Payware add-on pack that was just released last week, and it finally cleaned up the landscape out here. Added a few landmarks and also rebuilt the airport. So the airport's probably right about here. We're going to come all the way around, cut across the middle of it, and then come in for our approach that way. How's our wind doing? Ooh, it's at 19 knots now from 77 degrees, so almost a perfect crosswind. And as you can see, Santorini is made up of several islands. It's not just one. And by the way, with that add-on pack, we're going to be going really fast, obviously. But if you have a low, slow plane and you like flying around here and you get that pack, it is definitely cool for a slower flight. I've already taken several out here. But that thing looks an awful lot like the top of a volcano, doesn't it? Because it is. And I learned something incredible while researching this trip, which is precisely why I love doing what I do around here. This was the site of what many consider to be one of the largest eruptions in human history in terms of how much material was ejected into the atmosphere, second only to Mount Tambora, which we checked out sometime last year over in Indonesia, Java. But before this trip, I thought that the blast blew away what I presumed to be a huge mountain that was out here, leaving only this ring that we see today, but that's not exactly what happened. If we could drain all the water around this island, we would see this is the tip of a shield volcano, and I know anyone who's seen any of our volcano tours knows what that is by now. And at different points over the last million years or so, there have been several complete mountains sticking up out of the water, each subsequently collapsing in on itself to form variations of this ring that we see today. But scientists think it actually looked very similar to what we see now before the Minoan eruption, which was that last big one, occurring in roughly 1600 BC. But there was a big island in the middle of it, just like there is now. Wasn't in the same spot, and that was the top of the active cone. But they believe there was almost a complete ring around it, which there's not now. In fact, the original name of the island was Strongili, which means circular. And I'm going to go ahead and come on down to 3,500 feet because that's where we need to be when we cross over the VOR. And I don't have to touch our vertical speed. It'll just kind of get there on its own, which is fine, I guess. Oh, we got a sailboat down there. Look at that. Look at all these cliffs. These are flawless. Look at that. All of it looks great. Terracing is great. Buildings look pretty good. So much better than it was before. But because this thing was circular, it has led some to speculate that this may be the site of the lost city of Atlantis, which, assuming those stories are true, would make a little bit more sense to me, since it would be extremely close to the source of those accounts. Notice how all of these houses are along these cliffs here. I'm going to tell you why when we're done, because there's a little fort out there that we really can't see from the air, but I'm going to tell you about that. All right, I'm going to slow down just a little bit more here. But most archaeologists dismiss the idea that this was... Look at all these rocks. Look at that. They don't think this was part of Atlantis because they say there's no evidence of that, but you would think that an eruption like what hit this place probably wouldn't leave much evidence of anything. But what's even more bewildering is that they have found a lot of artifacts that point to an advanced and very wealthy community down here compared to what discoveries they made from the same period on other islands in this region. So this is where the active volcano is now. Look at those lava flows. Amazing. But before all that went down, this island was the center of the Minoan culture, which thrived all across the Aegean from around 3100 to 1100 BC, and is often regarded as the first organized civilization in all of Europe. So right down here, this is where the cruise terminal is. So you got to park down there and then go up this switchback here to get up to the mainland. Here's where a lot of the houses and stuff are along these cliffs. Oh boy, those guys are playing chicken. They better watch out. We got some boats down here. It just looks great. So we're going to fly right over the VOR station that is on the southern end of the strip, which is right over here. And then we'll take our turn to the south. But what has been discovered out here seems far too advanced for their time across the board. They had complex urban settlements with multi-story buildings, built huge temples and palaces, and had developed artistic skills that would not reemerge for another 1,000 years or more. But even more peculiar is that they found no evidence of a monarchical system of governance, or any kind of governance at all. Look at that stuff. Just awesome. It's absolutely perfect now. It was such a mess before. Looks so good. Oh, man, thank you. Thank you for doing that. But they know they had some kind of religion out here because of all the temples, but no one is really sure what they're worshipping. And they did have a written language, but it's not yet been fully deciphered, and no one's really sure of its origins. But it did, however, become the origin of other local written languages down the road. And as if all that's not fascinating enough, once the Minoans were gone, their whole civilization was lost to history until it was rediscovered in the early 1900s. Which is a welcome reminder that just when we think we've got it all figured out, it turns out we really don't know much of anything at all. So, getting back to the eruption, the fuse was lit on this thing in what geologists and volcanologists believe was likely a series of earthquakes that may have preceded the blast by several weeks, likely prompting most of the locals to pack up and get away from the island. But when it finally blew, it vaporized the former central island and the whole western side of the ring. The projected rating on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI, would have been as high as a 7, which is second from the top and extremely rare, sending as much as 20 cubic miles of material into the atmosphere, and almost certainly creating a global volcanic winter. But as you saw, it didn't blow the whole thing away, just buried everything that remained under a whole lot of ash. But what researchers believe to be far more destructive was a bunch of mega tsunamis that came when that thing was blown its top, wiping out all the coastal towns and villages of the surrounding islands. And it's probably no coincidence that the eruption appears to coincide with the end of the Minoan reign in the Aegean. Alright, so we're on our approach right now, and once we take this next turn, we're going to get down to 3,000 feet, and then I got to start slowing way down. And then we'll come down to, I'm going to go ahead and come down to 3,000 now, because we got to be there for our final fix before we get on to final. And then we'll be heading on in. They didn't put much of that white stuff on the right window, which is nice, I guess. Let's see what the underbelly looks like. Awesome. So cool. And it appears that the autopilot shuts off once you get to about... Alright, see, we're already coming down quite a bit, so I may go ahead and... Yeah, we're way too low now, 500 feet. I'm not sure when it turns itself off, but that was getting awfully close. And I'll just hand fly it in from here. Alright, so we need to start slowing way down. Get our air brake out, because we're still over 300 knots, our speed brake. And I'm guessing the gear speed is probably around 200 knots. So we'll get that baby out, start getting some flaps out. Alright, gears out. 1 notch of flaps. And we'll see if we can get our velocity vector indicator somewhere near the end of the runway there. So right now we got a 9 knot wind coming from 32 degrees. So we'll aim a little bit to the right with our nose there and let the VVI tell us where to go. Yeah, we're way too low now. Let's pick it up just a little bit. I'm guessing the stall speed's probably 100 to 120 maybe. Again, totally guessing. And we got 1 notch of flaps out. Okay. Once we get her down, we'll pull on over to the airport, and I'll even hop outside the plane, take a real quick drone tour just to show you what it looks like, the airport, because it does look pretty good. Well, what's going on with that island down there? We got some spikes in the water. And right up here is where they have found the ancient city of Thera, and I'll show you that was one of the places. I don't know if it was there before the eruption or if they rebuilt it after or what, but there's a pretty big area they've uncovered up top here, and I'll show you that on the satellite map we're down too. So it was a bit ambiguous as far as how old that is. Sites were saying some different stuff. So our usual announcements. If you have not joined our Discord page, that link will be on there as well. Very cool place to hang out. We got about 40 members in there now. All very cool people talking about all kinds of very cool stuff. I put supplemental material on there about our flights, our schedule for upcoming flights, gear reviews, plane reviews. And of course we can just chit chat. When we do our group flights, we'll go into a little audio chat room on there. And when I take my test flights over these places, I always turn that on so you guys can join me if you'd like to. Alright, 1 more notch of flaps. which may be the last notch of flaps. Yep, it is. So you can check that out. And our bookmark file for all of our flights will also be in there. If you don't know how to get that into little NavMap, which helps a lot if you want to try to see the stuff that we're seeing, I've got a little tutorial video for that. And if you don't know how to get the flight plans into little NavMap, I've also got a tutorial for that in our how-to section. All right, let me just concentrate here because this thing does get a little bit touchy as we're coming in. All right, it's aiming me a little bit to the left, so we'll come over this way, but I don't feel like it's going to blow us that much. We got a fairly long runway here. This thing stops real quick. Yeah, we're a little bit high. And I think I'll be able to hit that second taxiway down there. Well, that wind did not do as much blowing as I was thinking that it would. Alright, and down we go. Cut it. Alright. Ooh, I'm giving it full right pedal right now. Man. There's no way. Well, now we got a 7-knot wind coming from the other side. Which explains that. Alright, that was weird. It's like as soon as we hit the ground, we got that. Alright, we'll take this other taxiway over here. If we can stop. Can we stop? Alright, well, I'm going to drive through the dirt a little bit. This thing can probably handle it. And I don't know what that noise was. I don't know if you heard it when we were taxiing to takeoff as well. One of you guys that knows this plane better than me, let me know what that's all about. And if this thing can survive the deserts in Iraq, it can definitely handle taxiing through the dirt over here. Alright, so we'll pull up to one of the parking spots I get over here. We'll take a quick drone tour, and then we'll check out little NavMap. Just so you can see what they got here. And they said they intentionally modeled 2 wrecked planes at the northern end of this runway. I could not find out what the story was behind those, but they're not wrecked. They're just kind of like old and abandoned and run down. But I'm guessing if they took the time to put them in there, there may be a story behind them. Might be like those planes from Cuba we saw on that Key West trip. Let's get that pointer out of there. And I would open our canopy when we stop. Well, we'll go ahead and try it. See if it'll stay open this time, just so we can hear the engines spooling down. But that's a cool trip. I mean, all these islands are really, really cool, but if you've ever wanted to check out Santorini and were really disappointed like I was, you won't be now. It looks amazing. Oh, we got some people waiting for us. Alright, get your cameras ready. Okay. Parking brake on. And there we go. I've got to reach under my mic. Okay, and then I think we can just... Let's turn our pumps off. I think we just push these and then we'll shut everything down for us. Maybe. There we go. That'll do it. Alright, let's see what happens if we open the canopy. Will it stay open? And I'll even try throwing the ladder out this time for you guys. Alright, so let me switch our camera view to drone here. Alright, let me just show you this real quick. On all the different liveries, see that little hatch where the ladder comes out of? They made a little different insignia, or like a cartoon for some of them, and little sayings in there. Every one of the liveries has something different, which I thought was really neat. Very cool. Okay, so let's see what we got around here, just real quick. There's nothing inside the terminal, by the way, but they put some signs out here, put a lot of vehicles, the fencing and everything looks way, way better than it did before. Nothing mind-blowing, but it's nice to have a nice-looking airport. I would have got this just for the scenery. I don't ever usually buy airports, as you guys know. But that looks pretty good. Looks really good. I just don't understand the whole thing with buying airports. I really can't get it, because they're so expensive, too. A lot of them are as much as the planes are. So those 2 planes that are abandoned are down on that end of the runway. We won't go all the way down there. So that's it. Looks pretty nice. And they added some additional landmarks on the island, too. Some things that you might want to check out, which you can definitely see if you're going lower and slower. I forgot to put our flaps up, but that's all right. Those people are going to make fun of me when I get out of the plane. All right, so let's check out little NavMap real quick. I'll show you some of the things we couldn't see very well while we were flying around. All right, take the centering off. And let's go ahead and just go to the regular old satellite view, not all the streets and all that stuff. All right, zoom out some. Oh, don't do that to me. Okay, so here is Naxos, and the little temple that we saw as we were first coming around is this thing right here, which doesn't look like much, but it definitely doesn't look like a basilica. So this is the one they tore down in the early part of the first millennium and built a big basilica, but you can see now it looks much, much more like an old temple. So I don't know if they just rebuilt that thing or what. So here's Mount Zeus, and Zeus's cave is right down here. You really can't see anything from here, but that's where it would be right there. And then we came up here. This is where the marble quarry was. Again, I'm going to go back to the other view. I don't know why when you switch midstream, it seems to kind of get a little bit jacked up like that. That's the wrong one. There we go. That seems to work better. Okay, so here's where the marble quarry was, where all the statues are still cut into the side of the mountain, and they would just cut them out if they got them out, and then haul it right down there, put them on the ships. And that looks like an old ramp that was probably, who knows how many thousands of years old that thing is. And that's where they put them on the ships. Over here we saw our dam, which, man, looked just like it. Look how dry it is here, though. That looked just like that. That was spot on. Fantastic. That one bad spot was probably right about here. So if you cut that a little bit closer, you can look out the right side of your plane to see the quarries over there. And here's where that Temple of Apollos was, or is. So there's the big gate. You can actually see it. And the rest of it was just unfinished. They never finished it. But that is an impressive looking structure right there. Really big. They said it's built out of 4 pieces of marble, and each of them weigh about 20 tons each. But I'm sure marble wasn't very expensive out here since they were mining all that stuff right around the corner. And they came over to Paros in the town of Naxos. And let me show you where that tower is, the Venetian Tower. So this is it right here. You could barely see it from the sim, but I bet if you flew over it, it would look circular if you were closer to it. And the other tower that was out here is no longer here, so it was probably, I don't know, maybe here or maybe on this side over here. Well, that'd be a long chain if they dragged it over there. But they said they had a chain connecting the two of them, wherever the other tower was, maybe over here. And I guess they just pulled that thing up when they didn't want anyone to come through there. So here's the newer quarry, and here's where the old one was, where they pulled out the marble for Napoleon's tomb. And you can go explore all those caves if you want to. Just crawl through the hole in the fence. It doesn't seem like anyone's stopping anyone either. Okay, we came down here. Here's where that tiny little island was. That was the first fortification in all of Greece. Saliagos. Look how tiny it is. And it looks like there's nothing on it now. The Google Map's a little bit clearer than that, but you really can't see anything on it now. Very interesting. And then here is Antiparos, and this is where all the really nice houses are. Check out some of these places. You know, that this one had some sort of architectural significance. I don't know what the deal was, but there was a bookmark in Google for it, so there's something special about that. And when I looked at pictures of it, you can kind of see here, it looks like it might be built underground, which is pretty neat. And then we came down here to, oh, here's where the cave is, with the oldest stalagmite in all of Europe. Can't see much of that either, but that's where you would go if you want to get to that. The cave of Antiparos. And then down here is where the big archaeological site is. So this is Despotico, this island, which is uninhabited. But there's the big archaeological site, portions of it anyway. And I don't know where the volcanic caves are that you can crawl around in, but probably right around here. That looks pretty volcanic looking. And then here's that really cool looking beach that we saw. And you can even kind of see, if it depixelates, well, on the Google map, they got a bunch of cabanas and stuff down there, which would probably be a whole lot of fun to check that out. All right, so then I told you about all that incredible undersea trivia. And then here's the tomb of Homer down here. All right, so that's the thing that I thought might be it. That's not it. And I don't know if we could have seen that at all. So you got to come down here a ways, and then there's where the amphitheater is, which I don't think we could see in the sim. And then here's where the tomb of Homer is. That little thing right there, which you definitely probably would not be able to see that in the sim. But if he lived, he may or may not be buried there. Wonder where they put his elephant. And then here's some ruins from this area that they've been mining up, which you could actually see in the sim. You can't see the ruins, but you can see the little light spot there as you're coming around there. The prehistoric settlement of Skarkos, if you say that correctly in Greek. And then we came around here to the big boy, Santorini. Okay, so right here, there's 4 Venetian castles on here. This is the only one that really looks like a castle. The others are kind of in the center of town, and you can't see much. But this one is called Oya Castle, or also St. Nicholas Castle. And this is really all that's left of it right now. Pretty cool looking from the ground. And that was built by the Venetians in, I think, the 1300s. And they built them because they were having a lot of pirate attacks out here. And they said that's also why they built all the houses on top of each other and along these cliffs, really all along the island. You can see they're all on these cliffs here, because it was a lot harder for the pirates to get to them and easier for them to defend if they did it like that. And before we zoom back in, before the eruption, this was connected all the way around, and it was about as fat as probably that part, if their renderings of that were correct, what they assumed it probably looked like. And down here it was a little bit fatter too. So it went all the way around here, and there was a tiny little channel right here, which is interesting because the descriptions of Atlantis also say there was a tiny little inlet that got into that area. Again, I'm not suggesting that's what this was, but I find it somewhat coincidental. And the original top of the volcano was probably in this region here. So it blew that completely away and then blew off this side of the island, created a bunch of mega tsunamis and a whole bunch of problems for a whole lot of people. And so this is what Santorini looks like. Here's where the cruise terminal is, where the ships pull in. And there's that switchback that we saw. Well, that's got to be a haul getting up and down that thing, huh? We did get to see a few cruise ships, which is cool. So that was for the approach. If you want to load up your Jeppesen plate, was for VOR-A for runway 33. That's where I got this from. In the full approach, I cut it a little bit short. It goes out 8 miles from here. This is like 7.8 miles, so I cut it just a little short. I probably should have just gone the full 8 because it didn't really matter. And that's it. One more thing I want to show you. If you feel like taking a little bit further out trip, you can see over here a little citadel they've got. You can see this outer wall of it. See that? We didn't fly over this island at all, but it's called the Mycenaean Citadel. You can see that. I flew out here. And they got a little heliport. I don't know what that's for, but it's just kind of right in the middle of this neighborhood. You can see that too, which was interesting. So you'd have to just kind of fly a little bit further over here if you want to check that out. So that's Santorini. Up next, I think will either be our trip out to Montenegro, or maybe I really want to take that trip out to Torrance, so maybe we'll do that one next. I'm not sure, but we're all about to find out. Had an absolute blast, learned all kinds of incredible things. We got to check out Santorini finally. Man, I've been wanting to do that for so long, and it finally looks so good. I cannot wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.